All right. Hello, everyone. Congressman Rodney Davis here. Thanks for joining us. As most of you on this call know, I'm the ranking member on the Committee on House Administration, and we have oversight over the election process in this country. This is our third roundtable. I'm glad to be joined today by my colleagues, Glenn Grothman, via video. Tom Tiffany, our newest member of Congress, is joining us by phone. And something to point out, Congressman Tiffany wouldn't be a member of Congress without going through an election during a pandemic. So we're proud to have him there, proud to have him as part of this process today. We're also joined by two of our election assistance commissioners, Christy McCormick and Don Palmer. You're gonna hear from them next. Please, just a little note, I'm giving everybody the opportunity to mute and unmute themselves. If you are not on mute, if you are not speaking and you're not on mute, I will ask you to please mute yourself. And please, especially members of the media, we will give you a time to answer questions after this. Let's not, during the hearing, ask questions so that we can respect everybody's ability to get the questions answered. And we'll give you plenty of time to talk to us. We're also here with Senator Kathy Bernier and also Wisconsin Elections Commissioner Marge Bostelmann. So they're going to be joining us too and offering some comments. First off, I just want to say thanks everyone for coming here. It's great, especially now as we're getting closer to the general election. I know it's tougher and tougher for local election officials to join us. I know you're busy, but this is important. The first two we've had have given us a lot of good information and have also given us some ideas of how states that may have had problems earlier are ready to go. Together, today we've gathered federal, state, and local officials. We're going to learn about the challenges facing election administrators. As I said before, very pleased to have my friends Don Palmer, Christy McCormick, the Election Assistance Commission with us, and also Senator Bernier, Commissioner Bostelmann, and also Wisconsin Elections Commission Administrator Meagan Wolfe, along with the local election officials. And they're the ones that make our elections processes work. Unfortunately, my Democratic colleagues, since the beginning of this Congress, have tried to push through the Committee on House Administration, nationalizing our election process. That's frustrating because, as we know, our Constitution specifically gives the authority to run our elections to our states and to our localities. We've seen with the passage of H.R. 1 and Speaker Pelosi's attempt to use the coronavirus as an excuse, they want to force states to adopt expanded vote by mail, certain polling place restrictions, and they even want to legalize a process already ripe with fraud, ballot harvesting. As a clear alternative to this national takeover by Democrats in Washington of our elections process, last month I introduced the EASE Act. It's the Emergency Assistance for Safe Elections Act. It's going to provide assistance without dozens of costly mandates to help state and local election officials administer elections in November. The EASE Act provides $200 million to help states operate safe places for people to vote in person. Now, a recent poll showed that 59% of Americans still prefer to vote in person. We're going to do what the will of the majority of Americans needs us to do, and we need to make sure our local officials have the supplies they need to make it happen. We also create a new program to pay off student loan debt to recruit younger poll workers at a time when our poll workers are of an average age, usually in many places of 65 or over. This is an important way to get young Americans involved in the electoral process and make them realize too, we settle our differences in this great country. We settle them at the ballot box, not by rioting in the streets like we've seen in some major cities. And especially, I want to give our thoughts and prayers today to the people of Kenosha, Wisconsin, who have seen their fair share, too much rioting and looting in the streets of Wisconsin. This bill also would give $100 million to help states clean their voter rolls. These are common sense strategies that I think we need to implement, and I certainly hope we can get some comments from our local election officials too. As it relates to the state of Wisconsin, I recently wrote a letter to the executive director of the Milwaukee Elections Commission regarding some of the mismanagement I saw during the primary election. Specifically, I asked a series of questions related to the closure of in-person voting locations, the lack of adequate poll worker assistance, and staffing issues at the commission. Unfortunately, the commission has yet to respond to my letter. I do not think that mismanagement by one or two counties should cast a cloud over an entire state. And I do not believe the press fairly covered Wisconsin's primary elections. So I'm hoping to provide a forum for all of you as our local election administrators to give us and the press a sense of what you need to safely and securely administer an election in the midst of a pandemic. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague at the Election Assistance Commission, Christy McCormick, for a brief. Actually, was I going Don first or Christy?
Me.
I'm going to turn it over to Don Palmer first from the Election Assistance Commission. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Congressman Davis. I appreciate it. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to talk about these issues. And I really appreciate you listening over the last couple of years to some of the issues in election administration. I really think focusing on the fundamentals is the most important thing. And that's why, when I heard about different ways to incentivize in the bill poll workers, I was very eager to find out more about it. This is a big issue, the poll workers and poll worker recruitment. It's one of the most important things to maintain open polling places on election day. And the EAC is doing a lot to do that, but I really appreciate the incentives in your legislation on student loans that might help the new generation of poll workers serve, not just sort of the transition that we've seen the last couple of years as the greatest generations become more elderly, but now it's even more acute with the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw some steep drop-offs in the primary across the country, and I'm hopeful that this bill will help us recruit more poll workers. Wisconsin actually did something interesting during the primaries, and it was also to bring in the National Guard to help out. It shows you how of a pressing issue this really is, and so I'm thankful for that. One of the other things that, I did mention the EAC is having a national poll worker recruitment day on September 1st. That's tomorrow. So whatever the press can do and local and state election officials to highlight that need, we're trying to drive the traffic to localities so they can recruit poll workers. One of the other things that you've really championed, Congressman, is the testing of non-voting equipment. At the EAC, we, pursuant to statute, we test voting systems and the voting equipment that is used across the country in a lot of jurisdictions. But one of the things we found out after 16 is the vulnerability of our non-voting systems, be it our voter registration systems or our not election management, but our electronic poll books that may be in the polling places, or our election results. And that awareness of the problem and the willingness to allow the EAC to go into there and start doing some testing and sort of reports on the security of those systems, I think is the future. And I thank you for that. I think it will improve voter confidence and make sure we have no disruptions in our electoral process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Christy, and she'll talk about some of the other aspects at the federal level that we've been thinking about.
Thank you, Don, and thank you, Congressman Davis, for including us in this roundtable. And I also want to thank you for your EASE Act. There are a number of ideas in the bill that are spot on with what is needed in the election community. And Commissioner Palmer has already pointed out a few. There are a couple others that I want to highlight. First is the pandemic funding of the additional $200 million. As you know, the EAC distributed $400 million that the Congress provided earlier this year in the CARES Act, possibly faster than any money has been distributed to the states by the federal government. And if this additional $200 million passes, we'll do the same and get this money out to state and local election officials as quick as we can. The $400 million that was provided earlier is being used to respond to election needs for the coronavirus. And I've heard from election officials that they would very much welcome more money for that purpose. Many states are in the position of offering voters more options to vote safely, and more options means more cost. Whether expanded voting by mail or increasing physical safety in the polling places, there are more expenses for this election. We've heard from election officials that 60% or more of the $400 million was used for the primaries, so half or less of the previous CARES Act money will be available for the general election. And given the media coverage of issues with mail-in voting, I do believe we'll see many people abandon the idea of voting by mail and will show up at the polling places. I expect that those states who have reduced the number of available polling places in favor of voting by mail will see long lines throughout early voting and on November 3rd. So it's important that money is available for PPE and disinfecting equipment, and the additional $200 million that your EASE Act provides will help keep polling places safe and secure. I'd also like to highlight the $100 million the EASE Act proposes to clean the voting rolls. Proper and appropriate list maintenance is always important, but especially so when it comes to universal vote by mail. I'm concerned that the unmaintained voting rolls will cause issues this fall. It's expensive to send out election mailings and ballot packages and have 10, 20% of those mailings come back to the election office as undeliverable, and this could mean millions of dollars in extra cost. I also want to just thank you real quick for putting the ballot harvesting prevention measures on the EASE Act. Chain of custody and security are extremely important, and the opportunities of misusing ballot harvesting are great. We need to have integrity in the voting process in order to maintain voter confidence. So I want to thank you again for this opportunity, and thank you for your EASE Act, and we look forward to answering any questions.
Thank you to both commissioners. Appreciate the work you do and appreciate you being here and representing the EAC on our third roundtable. Now I want to turn it over to Marge Bostelmann from the Wisconsin Elections Commission. I know her and Meagan Wolfe have some comments to make briefly. Marge?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak on behalf of Wisconsin. I thank you, Congressman Davis, for all that you're doing. I did watch the other two sessions you've already had with the other states just to kind of get an idea, and I learned a lot. And what I'd really like to kind of talk about a little bit is that Wisconsin is one of the most decentralized states for election administration in the country. And you had talked a little bit about the idea of going national. Well, we are totally at the opposite end. We have 1,850 municipalities, each with a municipal clerk who runs her own election. So we actually have 1,850 elections being run in the state of Wisconsin by individual clerks. And you talked a little bit about the April election, and I can tell you that there was really 1,848 municipalities who really had few problems. And I personally went to visit 6 municipalities close to me and found that there really were no issues. And a lot of the clerks had said that they found new ways of doing things, that they would move forward with those in the future. So I think that was a real help. The other thing I think is important is that the absentee ballots in that April election went from 6% in the past to 60%. That is something we had 25 days from the time the stay-at-home order was issued till election day to really turn everything around and promote that people would go to mail-in ballots, and that really was a snafu. It was really overwhelming for the municipal clerks, and overall I think they did an amazing job of being able to send those out, get them back. I think when we look at the August 11th partisan primary election that we had, there were almost no issues at all with that. So given the amount of time that we had to learn, the amount of time to get the absentee ballots out and back in, I think we did very, very well at that. And truthfully, I look forward to the November election. I believe that Meagan, who has just put together over 100 pages of how Wisconsin has prepared for that, I think we'll do well in that election. And I have the utmost confidence in all of our municipal clerks. I worked with them. I worked with the county clerks who work with the municipal clerks in their counties to make sure these elections go straight. And I just have overwhelming confidence that they'll do well. And with that, I would like to introduce Meagan Wolfe, who's the administrator of the Wisconsin Election Commission and who does an absolutely fabulous job in those 25 days that we had, pulled things together, I think, out of a hat to be able to make sure that our elections were safe and fair. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Bostelmann, and thank you, Congressman Davis, and everyone else on this call. I'm honored to be a part of this discussion today. I think Commissioner Bostelmann said it very well. Our clerks in the state of Wisconsin, and there are 1,850 municipal clerks and 72 county clerks, are incredibly resilient, resourceful. They were able to use a lot of ingenuity to get us through our April presidential preference election. As we head into November, it will actually be Wisconsin's 4th statewide election in 2020. And as you mentioned, we also had a congressional race that spanned more than 600 jurisdictions in May. So I believe that we've had a lot of opportunities to learn and improve our process. One of the things that we really hold as a fundamental value at the Wisconsin Elections Commission is, of course, transparency. After our April election, we did a deep dive into the absentee process and the election itself to learn everything we could about the process. What went well, what didn't go well, the good, the bad, the ugly, to be able to examine our process, work with our local election officials, and do all that we can to make it better. And so as Commissioner Bostelmann mentioned, we just put out this week, we'll be presenting to our commission tomorrow, a 130-page paper that doesn't just say Wisconsin is ready for November. We show Wisconsin voters how we're ready for November. All of the many efforts that have happened over the course of the last few months to ensure that we're ready in partnership. And I really mean that. Our local election officials are truly partners in all sense of the word to prepare for the November election. So with that, I think that we can very confidently say that Wisconsin has looked at everything we can to learn about our process to make it better, and we're ready to show the world how we're ready for November.
That is great. Thank you, Marge and Meagan. And I'm sorry if I mispronounced your last name before. I heard Meagan call you Bostelmann. So Marge Bostelmann is with us. I do want to turn it over for the last person giving opening remarks today, and then we're going to get into a question and answer period. But Senator Kathleen Bernier, Senator, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Congressman, and it's nice to see everyone on the call. My history with elections go back to municipality level, where I worked as a chief inspector in the town of Anson. I was a county clerk for 12 years, spent 8 years in the assembly chairing the campaign elections committee, now serve the campaign elections committee at the Senate level. And I'm happy to say I'm on the board of advisors for the EAC. So nice to see you, Christy and Don. My job has always been, and I considered it important, to make sure that we have high integrity in the election administration. I trained 150 poll workers each and every year for and with the municipal clerks in my county. I know the municipal clerks consider elections one of the most important aspects of their jobs. And I, every session, work with the Wisconsin Election Commission, the municipal clerks, and the county clerks to continue to make elections efficient, but yes, with the highest integrity possible. And so I've always been able and willing to work with the municipal and county clerks on various pieces of legislation, and I rely on Wisconsin Election Commission a lot. So pleasure to be here. Thank you all for being here as well.
Senator, thank you so much. Now we're going to start the question and answer period. Just so you know, each person who's able to ask questions is going to have 5 minutes to ask questions and to have the responses, because I would like to open it up to our local officials to ask questions of our EAC commissioners and all of us. So if you hear this sound, consider that the gavel in a real hearing room and kind of wrap up. First off, I want to start with my good friend and colleague, Glenn Grothman. Glenn, the floor is yours, my friend, and I know you have to go after this round of questions. We wish you the best, buddy. Got to hit unmute.
Okay, now can you hear me? First of all, I'd like to say hi to Kathy Bernier. We served together in the state legislature, so pleasant surprise today to get to talk to Kathy. I think one of the things I want to talk to maybe Marge or Meagan about, if you want to elaborate for Rodney so you see what goes on out there, is the difference in time periods for early voting from one municipality to the other in the state of Wisconsin. I personally live in a relatively unpopulated township, the town of Greenbush in Sheboygan County. But our biggest municipality, the city of Milwaukee, your second biggest, the city of Madison, may have different time periods for the ability to early vote. And I wondered if you could talk about that a little so that Rodney understood that, at least as I understand it, the ease of
Looks like Glenn might have some connection
you
problems.
guys will talk a little bit about that.
I would be glad to discuss, Commissioner Bostelmann, if you'd like to jump in, please do. But the state of Wisconsin, up until recently, there were court decisions in place that allowed each jurisdiction to be able to set their parameters for in-person absentee voting. There was a recent court ruling in the last few months that did limit that time period. So heading into November, clerks do have a 2-window period prior to the election to set in-person absentee hours. But like Congressman Grothman said, each jurisdiction, so each of those 1,850, does have the flexibility to be able to set the parameters for in-person absentees. So many small townships may do things like by appointment, where they put up a notice and allow their voters to cast their in-person absentee by appointment. And then there are other jurisdictions that may have set hours that they post at multiple locations throughout their jurisdiction. So during that time period, up through the Sunday before the election, the jurisdictions do have the opportunity to set the parameters for their jurisdiction for in-person.
Right. I have a question for, if I live in the city of Milwaukee, could they set even over 40 hours for in-person absentee voting?
Yes.
Okay, so can we say we have fair elections in Milwaukee if in a big Democrat city like Madison or Milwaukee, maybe you have 50 or 60 hours available to you for in-person absentee, and I live in the town of Greenbush and maybe have 3 hours available for me for absentee? Can we really say we have fair elections in Wisconsin when it varies dramatically so much, and it appears as though the rules are set to benefit voters in big, traditionally Democrat cities? Do you feel that given that we can really say we have fair elections in the state of Wisconsin?
Well, I'd like to address that. I was county clerk in Green Lake County for 24 years. And I remember when this issue came up, and originally the legislature was going to mandate specific time limits for all municipalities. And I remember how very, very much against that I was, coming from a small county, because we look at our village of Marquette in the county of Green Lake that has 100 people in the whole city, in the whole village. So to mandate that they would have hours for absentee ballots from 7 in the morning till 6 at night was silly. And I believe that the legislature heard us, because for them to do absentee ballots by appointment or specific hours based on their population, I think was appropriate. And I understand what you're saying about the city of Milwaukee, but when you're talking about over 1 million people, it's a far cry from a small village in Green Lake County. So I think that that's why things are a little bit different, because you couldn't have a standard time period that would fit all the municipalities within the state.
Well, I guess what I'm going to say, because I'm going to respond to that, I think the idea wouldn't be to tell a township in Green Lake County you have to be open for 60 hours. The way to respond is say, if in a township you can only be open for 3 or 4 hours, which is what I understand, we should restrict in person to the same time in the city of Milwaukee, right? Say, okay, city of Milwaukee, you want to do in-person absentee, you're restricted to the same 3 hours that would be convenient for, say, the town of Greenbush in Sheboygan County. And that's what I mean. I mean, the idea that they are able to take advantage of the fact that they are a large city with a lot of tax dollars to make it a lot easier to vote in Milwaukee than a small township.
Congressman Grothman, I'm going to hop in here. I worked with Dewey Strobel and others who had the original bill. It was a judge who opened it up to allow municipalities to decide how many hours, how many days, and it was all over the board. It was inconsistent, which was difficult for electors. Now we have the Court of Appeals who finally ruled and said we're going back to the 2 weeks of early voting, and the number of hours and the number of places will be considered by the municipal clerk or the Board of Commission as to how many in-person absentee voters that they project to have. And so each municipal clerk can decide for themselves how many hours it is required to serve their voters. And if one of the municipal clerks would like to jump in and comment on how they personally, their job is to address their voters, their electors. And the larger the municipality, the more hours and time they need to get the early voters in and out the door. And then in the village of Lake Hallie, we have Monday through Friday, 8 to 4:30, and they can do that easily. In a town, neighboring town with 100 voters, town of Hallie, they do by appointment only. And so if one of the municipal clerks would like to chime in, I think it is fair, Congressman Grothman, and you know I'm always on your side, but I think it is fair to allow them to accommodate their electors that works for them.
I think originally I had that bill, and we did try to make it equal around the state, and I realize right now it's easier to vote in say the city of Milwaukee than the town of Greenbush, and I realize that's because townships don't have a lot of don't have those high tax levies they do in Milwaukee, but I still think it's unfortunate that right now, because of a bad judge, I would say, it's easier to vote in some places than others.
All right, Glenn, you yield back?
Yeah, I yield back.
Thanks, buddy. I was just about to gavel you, man. Hey, I know you have to go, but thanks for doing everything you do on behalf of your constituents. It's great to serve with you. I'm proud to call you college.
So many clerks and deputy clerks on the line. I was really glad to see it, and thank you for doing this. Thanks,
buddy. Hey, we're going to turn it over to our colleague. We'll call him the pandemic election congressman. He's via phone. Tom Tiffany, you're up for your questions, buddy.
Okay. Thank you very much, Congressman Davis. And I thought Commissioner Bostelmann made a really good point about Wisconsin's decentralized system, because I know I've seen it up close and personal in the last year, and how effective that is, having that very decentralized system. I think other states around the country can learn from the Wisconsin experience. And I had the opportunity in the April 7th statewide election, which was the first statewide election that was held during the whole coronavirus epidemic. And it was pulled off here in Wisconsin. And it is a direct result of clerks across the state of Wisconsin making sure it happened. I put my name in the hat in the county I live in Oneida County, and had a local town contact me and say, hey, we could use your help because we had some people that have chosen not to work because they're elderly. And I had the chance to be able to work that April 7th election. And I was so impressed in a short amount of time of that town, how they had gotten themselves prepared for it. And then when you had the follow-up with the May 12th special election in northern Wisconsin, local communities, towns and counties had figured out even better ways to use best practices to be able to accomplish completing our election safely and securely. Wisconsin proved it here over, as Meagan Wolfe said, over the last number of months, and I couldn't be prouder of our election officials here in Wisconsin, the clerks across the state. So with that, I would just like to throw it back to some of our local clerks, if any of them want to chime in. What I heard from most of them is that we've been able to accomplish this through ingenuity and stick-to-itiveness. Is there anything else that's needed, or are you pretty well prepared for this fall November election?
Any clerk that wants to answer that, go ahead and unmute themselves.
This is Lori Albright from Outagamie County, Wisconsin. One of the biggest challenges that I see in our municipalities, of course, is poll workers. We did have to use the National Guard both in April and August. We're making every effort, and so are the municipalities and the clerks, to attempt to find that labor. Unfortunately, as many dollars as you might throw to things, it boils down to people feeling confident that their health is going to be okay with in-person voting. And we'll see what's going to happen in November, but I want to thank you, Congressman Davis, if you're coming up with a solution to help us incentivize those types of workers that will be healthy enough and willing enough to serve, because I would like to see us not use the National Guard because they're needed in other areas. Thank you.
And if I could chime in, this is Congressman Tiffany again. I really appreciate those comments from the clerk from Outagamie County, because what I found is that, so first of all, my wife happens to be a town clerk, and we have two daughters who are in college who were home during this period of time in April and May, and we asked them if they would like to go out and work and at the polls, as well as some of their friends, and they really just didn't know the process and how they could help. We actually saw many more young people that came forward, not enough. As Lori said, the National Guard still needed to be used, but there were some of those slots that were filled by young people. I think if we, I would encourage robust efforts, and I think Senator Bernier has spearheaded some of them in Wisconsin, to really reach out to those young people who are civic-minded and who would be willing to help. I think that there is an untapped resource there if we find some non-traditional ways to reach out to other people who have never considered working at the polls before. I don't know if Senator Bernier wants to comment on that.
Thank you, Congressman Tiffany. Yes, we have opened up the polls. Right now, there's a bill kind of stuck in the Senate, which is a whole nother story, to allow homeschool students to work the polls. We've opened it up to students 16, 17 years old in high school that come and work the polls. We can work with government teachers to talk to their students, and they can get time off if their GPA is in good standing. So we've done a lot to encourage young people to be a part of the process, and if anybody has any other ideas, we're all ears.
I have, Congressman Davis, I'm just going to ask one more question, and then I'll yield back here. And this may go to Commissioner Bostelmann or to the director, Meagan, Wolfe. I do not remember the judge's name, but he described Wisconsin's absentee ballot system, the ability to absentee vote, as robust in one of his decisions. And there's a distinct difference between absentee voting and mail-in voting, and yet this judge recognized that Wisconsin has a very good system of allowing access to be able to vote, as well as being able to complete the process. I don't know if Commissioner Bostelmann or Meagan Wolfe would like to comment on that judge's ruling where he described our system as robust. In other words, that it, to me, it says that it does work and most importantly provides sufficient opportunity for people to be able to cast their ballot if they choose
be glad to jump in, but please, Commissioner Bostelmann, let me know if you'd like to add anything. So the process in the state of Wisconsin is absentee, by mail absentee. And so what that means is that any voter without an excuse can request an absentee ballot from their local election official. And then each of those 1,850 local election officials, they're the ones with the authority to review the applications, decide if they meet the requirements for somebody being a lawfully registered voter, submitting the right type of photo ID, and then they make the determination whether or not they can issue that absentee ballot to that voter if they've met all the criteria. And I think in Wisconsin, this is where one of those benefits of us having such a decentralized system really comes into play, because those local election clerks really know their voters. They know what's usual in terms of, if somebody is registered to vote, they're able to also use that really powerful statewide voter registration database to issue those requests. But I think that in this case, one of the ways that makes Wisconsin so unique is our decentralized structure. And in the case of absentee voting by mail, we're able to, again, spread that over 1,850 sort of watchdogs on that process to make sure that it goes well and that they're serving each of their communities. And so I think in that respect, that's, a real strength here. In addition to the fact that our ballots actually go out 47 days before the election. So there's a federal law about military and overseas ballots needing to go out 45 days before an election, but a state law here in Wisconsin says that the county clerks have to distribute the ballots to the municipalities on the 48th day, and ballots have to be sent by the 47th day for that initial run. And so that also gives additional time for that process as we head into the November election.
I agree with what Meagan said. I think our absentee voting, the requests, all of that, the fact that it is the smaller municipalities, and often cases smaller municipalities who are know exactly who those people are, or being able to vote in person, I think that really does lend a lot to the Wisconsin absentee. And I think it makes it much more, it makes it safer, it makes it much more personalized. And I think the way that Wisconsin does it is good. It may be cumbersome when other states look at it, but I think as far as being able to truly know what's going on, who's asking, the fact that there is the 1,850 municipalities who are overseeing it, I think that does make it. I think it does make it good.
Any other local election officials want to respond to Congressman Tiffany's question? We're about to go into the time where you can ask questions of the EAC commissioners or us too. But if anybody wants to quickly follow up, just unmute yourself and I'll give you a minute to do that. All right, hearing none. Congressman Tiffany, thank you for your participation. I know you're going to stick around. I would like to turn it over to the local election officials. I'll finish up at the end with any questions I may have, but your questions may be a lot more, a lot more important to the EAC commissioners to hear from you on the ground. So feel free, if you'd like to ask a question of anyone, just unmute yourself. If you start talking over somebody else, I'll judge who I think should go first, and then we'll hold for the next one. All right, go ahead. Well, seeing none, unless somebody didn't know how to work their mute button, anybody want to offer up any quick questions for the EAC Commission or us? Otherwise, I'll go in and ask some questions I have. Oh, Senator Bernier, go ahead.
Congressman Davis, thank you very much. I think one of the things that we found as a huge problem with our mail-in balloting was the chain of custody issues with the United States Postal Service. I think no one has discussed that right now. We do have a process, I understand, with the Wisconsin Election Commission working with the United States Postal Service for better and more efficient mailing service. But that is one of the downfalls that the people who want all mail-in voting don't understand that you lose that chain of custody. Once it leaves the municipal clerk's office and it gets to you, and then you send it back again, we're not exactly sure where everything is. And it is nowhere near as safe, secure, and accurate as in-person voting. And so I think the voters and the media out there need to recognize that there are some downfalls of mail-in balloting. And the fact not only that the poll lists may not be 100% accurate, also the chain of custody is an issue. And I think that you have to recognize if you are going to use in-person or mail balloting or absentee balloting, there are some risks involved in that. And if anybody from the EAC would like to comment on that, I know that it's taken years for many of the states who went with all mail balloting to get all their ducks in a row. It's not something that you can just all of a sudden do on a whim. The electors have to be all on board. There's education provided. There's all kinds of laws that have to be passed and safeguards put in place. There is no state, in my opinion, who doesn't already have mail-in voting that should be doing it at all.
I'd be happy to take that. You know, the issues that we are hearing about this year really are nothing new with the post office. I mean, we met with them 5 years ago on these same issues, concern with processing of ballots. You know, the post office has been taking out blue boxes since 2009. They have stopped 5 years ago or more processing ballots from blue boxes. They stopped picking up blue box mail on the weekends. And they also had been closing whole processing plants. There are states that don't even have a mail processing center in their state. So this has been a concern for a long time. We've had a lot of communications with the post office over the last 5 years. As you know, being on one of our boards, we set up a postal committee to look into a lot of the issues that have been occurring over the years. I think this year, because of the volume of mail-in voting, it's going to be an even bigger problem. It'll be the same problems, but it'll just be a bigger problem just because the number of ballots. We have talked recently to representatives from the post office who recommend people get their absentee ballot as soon as possible and no later than 15 days before the election, and to mail that back at least 7 days before the election. We recommend really at least 10 to make sure that it actually does get back to the election office on time. One of the problems that we've seen in the primaries is a huge number of ballots coming back late. We've seen more rejections of mail-in ballots in the primaries than we saw in the 2018 general election and in the 2016 general election. So that doesn't bode well for this year with mail-in ballots. I think we'll see a lot more rejections. And part of the problem with that is that a lot of people are voting on these ballots for the first time. They miss certain things like signatures and putting it properly in the envelopes that are provided. Voting in person, you have someone there to help guide you through the process. When you're voting at home, you don't have that ability. So a lot of mistakes are made by the voter themselves and also not getting it back soon enough to be counted. We also have issues with postmarks. I think you might have seen some of that in Wisconsin. Generally, we've been told that postmarks are to cancel stamps and that if it's metered mail, the post office generally does not cancel a metered envelope. So we've asked them to, and they've said they will try to cancel all of the election mail, you know, but it is a problem. Illegible postmarks are a problem. So, you know, there are a lot of pitfalls to mail-in voting, and you pointed out a number of them. So we're working on the issue. We're trying to keep people aware to get their ballots back more quickly and to be careful about how they fill out their ballots.
Senator Bernier, you got any other questions for the EAC or any of us?
I think I'm good for now.
All right, I'm going to give the locals one last chance if you want to follow up on that or if you want to ask any questions. Otherwise, you're leaving it to me, and that's the last thing you all want to do.
Congressman Davis, this is Wendy Christensen. I'm the Racine County Clerk here in Wisconsin, and we've spent a fair amount of time talking about the absentee voting and the in-person versus the mail. I think we also need to stress that a lot of procedures have been put in place for the election day voting that are going to make things safer for the voters. We had a lot more time to prepare and obtain supplies. Those of us at the county level worked with our EOC centers. You know, they've got petitions for the poll workers. There's more instructions for the poll workers on sanitizing surfaces and things as voters come in. And we are in a much better situation going into November than we were prior to that presidential primary in April, when the COVID situation was much newer and less information was known. So I think we also should be stressing to the voters that are looking to do that in-person vote, to cast their ballot right at the polling place on election day, that again, that situation has improved. There are processes in place to do that social distancing, to sanitize things, and that they shouldn't be afraid to go to their polling place if they're not comfortable or don't want to use either the mail-in absentee or the in-person process.
Thank you, Wendy. And I saw Jodie Olson had her mic off. If Jodie, you'd like to chime in, I do want to comment real quickly. Wendy, you're right. We do need. I'm glad you're more prepared. I'm glad you're using some of the funding. And I hope to ask each of you how you're using your HAVA funding, so that we can get a better idea of what holes may still exist. But 59% of all Americans want to vote in person. We got to give them that chance to do so without disenfranchising them, without closing polling places and creating long lines. These are the things that I know each of you are working on. Jodie, did you have a comment or a question?
I did. There was a couple things that I actually have on a list that have been concerns, and one of them was already touched on, and that was the witness signatures. We have had a huge influx with the absentee ballots of people missing the witness signature, and we're having to go and hunt down a lot of people on that. And if we can't get them, then we want everybody's ballot to count. And that was one of the frustrations we had. Nursing homes was also a concern, and I'm curious to know if anybody else had that issue. But the special deputies, we were not allowed to go into the nursing homes. And so we got almost no nursing home ballots back. And that was unfortunate because people were not voting. And I don't know exactly why that is. The people that had to administer within the nursing homes, I'm not sure that they really pushed or took that seriously for the people to actually want to vote. But I found that to be a concern. And one other concern I think everybody else has is the wasted postage that is happening. And I had a question. We have to put postage on all of the absentee ballots that go out, and we have a large volume of them now. And a lot of them, they're not trusting the post office anymore. So they want to put them in a drop box. So we are getting a drop box with our money, with our funding. But is there any way of working anything out with the post office to have almost like a, I don't know if you call it a courtesy reply or something like that, where we don't have to put the postage on there, and we work something out with the post office that only if it comes back, we get charged the postal fee?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for the post office. That would be something you might want to bring up with your local postal folks. We could certainly address it with them on the federal level. You know, they're broke basically, so I don't know that they're going to be able to do that, but we'll see what they say. It is a concern with all of the extra postage, mailing all these out, and then a lot of it is wasted. And I mentioned that in my opening remarks. I mean, that's a big concern, and it's very costly. Yep. So it's a great idea. We'll explore it and see if we can get any answers out of the post office.
You know, you had talked about those blue boxes, and
yeah.
If they're pulling all those blue boxes, is there any way that we could actually get them and refurbish them to use them as absentee ballot boxes?
It's another great question. Something we'll bring up with them.
Thank you.
Very good comments and questions, Ms. Olson. I appreciate them. We'll also work with Christy and Don and the EAC through our House administration team and see if we can join them in getting those questions answered. I'm glad you brought up some of the issues that you faced in the last elections. I do want to look further at the nursing homes and assisted living facilities to see if that was a national, see if that was a trend in all of the elections that were held during the pandemic. Remember, Illinois, where I live and where I represent the 13th district, we also had a primary election during the pandemic, the first week of the pandemic. So it'd be interesting to see if there was a drop off here in Illinois versus Wisconsin, which was a little bit later. So thank you for your comments. Thanks for everyone being on today. I'm going to go ahead and ask a few questions of some of the folks that are on here to get some more answers for issues that we didn't have addressed yet. And really, then I'll close up and everybody's welcome to stay on for our media Q&A afterwards. If you do stay on, I may turn the question from the media over to you, just so you know. But I do want to ask, Ms. Bostelmann or Ms. Wolfe, you know, you've gotten an increase in HAVA funding from the federal government through the EAC. What has been the way that you've spent most of those dollars? And could you give us an idea how better prepared you are when it comes to cybersecurity threats?
Sure, I'd be glad to take that. So there's two sets of funding, well, actually three. So there were the 2018 HAVA security funds, the 2020 HAVA security funds, and then of course the CARE funds. When it comes to the CARE funds, I would say that those really were critical to us being able to get out supplies, resources to our local jurisdictions. So the vast majority of those funds were used as part of a municipal subgrant so that they would have enough funding to adjust their process to the increase in absentee by mail. So to be able to buy envelopes, postage, personnel that's needed to process some of that on the local side. It also was to help assist them with things that might be customized, you know, PPE or sanitation efforts, things like those plexiglass, you know, sort of sneeze barriers that we can't buy on their behalf, that they have to buy at the local level for their polling place. Then we were also able to use those funds to procure PPE and sanitation supplies at the state level through our State Emergency Operations Center, and then our National Guard helped us with distribution to the counties. The counties then helped us get those supplies out to the local jurisdictions. And I think we're very proud to report that we were able to fulfill all the orders for PPE and sanitation supplies for both our August and November elections. Those core supplies are already out in the jurisdictions in the quantities that they requested to implement our public health checklist. And now we're working to utilize any of those remaining CARES Act funding to get them additional things that they might need that maybe they didn't anticipate before August, or maybe they used more than they thought they would. So those have really been pivotal. In terms of security funding, the same. A lot of it had to be used to increase the security efforts at the state level to make sure that we had the staffing, the systems, the cybersecurity for our infrastructure, but also we did a local security grant to both the municipalities and to our counties. At the local level, it was for things like making sure that they had secure computers. Many of our jurisdictions are townships. They do not have things like computers that are provided to them by their township. And so what we did is we provided a grant so that they could get a secure device, IT support, and also attend cybersecurity training. And over 1,000 of our local election officials did not have those things, and they do now. In terms of counties, we just provided with our 2020 subgrants to the counties so that they were able to do things like purchase Albert sensors, monitoring and detection devices for their networks. But those have been incredible efforts, and we couldn't have done that without the federal funding. The one thing I would mention is those things aren't going away. Those are things that we're going to have to continue to put efforts and funding towards because cybersecurity has no finish line. It's something that we're going to have to continue to address into the future. And so I think sustainability needs to be a big part of those future conversations.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wolfe. Ms. Bostelmann, did you want to add anything?
I just want to say I think Meagan summed it up very well, and I appreciated the fact that as the commission looked at all of this, we looked at everything from the state level down to the municipal level to be able to inquire and find out where the needs were throughout the entire state. And I think that as Meagan oversaw all of the grant applications and the as we approved the grant issuing, I think overall Meagan's staff did an absolutely marvelous job of being able to figure out exactly what was needed and being able to provide the options to all those municipalities and counties.
Great. Great to see you guys are utilizing the funding. I know Commissioner Palmer mentioned our support for creating some standards for our e-poll books and other non-election machine related materials that have to already go through an approved EAC stringent approval process. So for us, it's looking ahead at the next cybersecurity threat. As a matter of fact, 2016, my home state of Illinois, there was a foreign actor who tried to hack into our voter registration system that's run by our Illinois State Board of Elections. Good news is, if it were infiltrated in a nefarious way and had been impacted, all of that same information is already at all of our local election authorities that could have easily been combined into one new database if need be. That's another important reason why we should have decentralized elections. So I appreciate your time here today, both of you. Thank you for your responses and your willingness to talk about what's going on in Wisconsin. Senator Bernier, I mentioned earlier in the call about some unfair press coverage of the Wisconsin primary election. What have you learned? And looking ahead to November, how do you make sure that we get the message out of what's happening right, rather than focusing on a county who may have done some things wrong?
Exactly, Congressman. Thank you for bringing that up. I think our media needs to be fair and balanced when it comes to full reporting. There were only 2 municipalities in all of the state of Wisconsin that really had some issues in April. In addition, the scare tactics they used in regard to COVID, I think finally the CDC did note that there were no upticks in COVID-19 due to the April election, and the finger pointing finally stopped. But I think that we can, if we can go to Walmart, if we can go to Menards, if we can go to Farm and Fleet and stand in line and purchase our products, we can safely vote in person in November. And I think we need our media there to help us get that word out that your vote, if cast in person, is safer and more reliable, and you know for sure that your vote counts. And we should encourage people to vote in person on election day and not discourage it and keep putting out the idea that somehow we should all vote by mail. That is not safe and secure. And I'll tell you, I would not be certain if I sent my ballot in even 10 days prior to an election that that ballot is actually going to count. So I think the media can help us out here.
I certainly hope they can too, and we're all going to turn to them next. But I do want to thank everybody for coming on today. When you look at what happened in Wisconsin, remember, the city of Milwaukee, they used to have 180 polling locations. They changed it to 5 during the pandemic. 59% of Americans want to still vote in person. That's a travesty. When you close polling places, you create long lines, even during a pandemic, and you discourage people from voting, along with the fact that we've seen in Los Angeles, California, 100,000 votes were not even counted. I mean, that's 100,000 people disenfranchised, and predominantly, according to studies, the young people and people of color are the ones who had their votes disqualified. You look at New York City, 84,000 disqualified, and tens of thousands of more in Wisconsin just in the primary. We've got to make sure everybody has a chance to cast a vote in a way that they choose to. And we need to make sure election officials don't use the same tactics that were used decades ago to disenfranchise voters in the South. So we need to make sure that we do what we can to take some of the ideas we heard today. Don, Christy, look forward to working with you, my colleagues, to address some of the concerns that were brought up today. And with that, this roundtable will come to a close. We're going to go to the media portion. If you'd like to stay on, you're more than welcome, but I warn you, I may ask you to answer a question. If you don't want to stay on, go ahead and leave the meeting now. But we'll turn it over to Ashley Phelps, our communications director. She'll kind of be the MC of the media. If you have any questions, go to the chat room and please directly send a question to Ashley Phelps. Thank you. And I don't know if she has any in the queue, but I'll turn it over to her.
Okay, thanks, Congressman. I don't see any questions in the queue yet. If you could chat me and let me know your outlet, we will.
Let me remind them too, if you're not on video and you want to ask a question, if you want to turn your video on and I can see you raise your hand, I will call on you while some others are getting them into the question. Or into.
Okay, I have a question from Pat with Wiz Politics. Pat, go ahead and ask your question to Administrator Wolfe.
Hi, Meagan, can you hear me?
Yes. Hey, Pat.
How are you doing?
I'm doing well.
So I have a question in regards to a couple of the comments that Senator Bernier made just now. She said earlier that voting by mail is nowhere near as safe, secure, and accurate as voting in person, followed up just a moment ago by saying that it is not safe and secure. Do you agree with those assessments in Wisconsin?
So from the State of Wisconsin Election Commission's perspective, we are doing everything we can to implement the law when it comes to all three statutorily required ways of voting. So whether a voter chooses to vote by mail absentee, by mail absentee in person, or at the polls on election day, all three methods, it is our job, and it is something that we set out in our report to prove that all three methods are secure and being conducted in accordance to Wisconsin state law with federal law, and also by incorporating those public health procedures as well. So we believe that no matter what option a Wisconsin voter chooses, that they will be able to utilize that option safely and securely.
Yeah, hey, Pat, this is Rodney Davis. I'd like to follow up on Ms. Wolfe's response. It's, of course, all election officials like Ms. Wolfe and Ms. Bostelmann are doing everything they can to ensure that we have free and fair elections, that every vote counts. And I will tell you, as somebody who has called Democrat local election officials to be my lone Republican witness at hearings in Washington, D.C., because I know them. My local county election official and I went to junior high and high school together. He was one of my witnesses not too long ago, one of the very few hearings that the Democrat majority in Washington put forth to talk about their nationalization of elections. I brought in a Democrat election official. He talked about the need to ensure that he had the flexibility to give everybody an opportunity to vote the way they see fit without a top-down approach. But the facts are the facts, Pat. I just mentioned 100,000 votes were disqualified because they were sent in too late. They didn't make it to the central counting location in time. And those individuals were disenfranchised. If they would have voted in person, that opportunity for disenfranchisement goes down to virtually zero. So those are the facts. Let's not get into a debate about whether or not mail-in voting can be just as accurate. It can be if you get your ballot early, if you turn it in time, and if the postal facility gets it to the central counting facility in time. If you think taking those 4 steps are more secure than walking into the voting booth that day, walking into the polling place, doing the signature verification there that day, if it's the same in Wisconsin as it is in Illinois, casting your vote and putting it into an optical scan counting machine, if you think those steps at a polling place are more secure and you can be better sure than going through those steps I just mentioned for a mail-in ballot, then you may have a little more faith than I do.
Okay, we'll go to Carrie with the Center for Public Integrity next, and then Steph with Axios, and then Henry with Wisconsin Examiner. Go ahead, Carrie.
Hi, yes. I wanted to ask, given Rep. Davis's comments on the need to keep in-person polling places open and available, I wanted to ask if Ms. Wolfe or one of the Wisconsin representatives can speak to how they are ensuring there will be enough polling places in cities such as Milwaukee to make sure there isn't a repeat of what happened in the primary, and how you're working towards that in addition to the poll worker recruitment piece, and how you're looking at, you know, where to locate them and who will be affected by any movements or closure of them.
Well, again, Commissioner Bostelmann, please feel free to jump in. But each jurisdiction, so each of those 1,850 jurisdictions, the local election official or clerk in that jurisdiction has the authority, along with their governing body, to determine how many polling places that they have. And the same with in-person absentee. There actually aren't any statutory boundaries sort of on that or a prescribed number of polling places. That being said, we just put out a 130-page report on how Wisconsin is ready for the November election. Part of that is we asked our largest jurisdictions to answer questions like that. How did you make the determination about how many polling places you'll have? How many will you have? What will your offerings look like? And so those reports from those larger jurisdictions are part of that, that are now posted on our website, and that will be part of our commission meeting tomorrow. So that being said, you know, I think local election officials, they make those decisions, but as we also discussed today, they're also accountable to their voting public. In terms of if they think that that is sufficient, or if they want to see something else from their clerks and their local election officials.
I think I'd also like to mention that in April, there were really only 2 municipalities that had concerns with polling places, and we have had the April 11th primary, and there were no concerns then. There were enough poll workers, there were enough polling places, and I see that following through November.
Great. Who's next, Ashley?
Steph with Axios.
Hi, thank you all for having this call. This has been really helpful. My question is, it's my understanding that in Wisconsin, absentee ballots cannot be processed or counted until election day. And given the primaries and given the number of requests that you all have already received for voting absentee for November, I just want to get a sense of how long you think it could take to make sure all the ballots are counted, and how long Wisconsinites and Americans in general should be expecting to be waiting for final results out of Wisconsin in November.
Well, I think some of our local election officials might be able to shed much more light on this than I can, but I think it's so incredibly important to that discussion that the unofficial results you see on election night, those are never official. So results have to go through 3 stages of certification before they become official, and sometimes that happens up to a month after the election. So on election night, those are always unofficial totals, and a lot of times those are coming from the AP's aggregate rather than any sort of unofficial even data set. So before results can be official, a few things have to happen. First, our municipal boards of canvass have to meet, and they have to reconcile all the numbers. They have to make sure that the right number of registrations versus registered voters, absentee requests versus actual ballots issued, the number of voter numbers versus the number of people that signed the poll book. All those things have to work out. They have to figure out all the numbers and reconcile everything. Then they certify at the local level. Then that goes to the county. The county does the same thing. If they find an issue, it has to go back to the municipality to reconcile. Once the county certifies, it comes to the state. We have to do a detailed look into comparing those numbers against the numbers in the statewide database before we can certify. So I think we have to get rid of this idea that any of those results you see on election night have ever been beneficial because they have not. Another plug I'll put in is that on election night or during the absentee process, those are all publicly observable processes. So anybody can come watch as those absentee ballots are being counted. They can come watch the canvass process at the municipal level, at the county level, or at the state level. will let you venture a guess how many people actually do come to watch those things. I've never had anybody come to the state certification. And so there's transparency in the entire process, but it never ends on election night. There's a lot more work that happens. And also, we will continue to emphasize accuracy over speed. Accuracy in elections, transparency in elections are fundamental. Speed is not a core value.
Hey, Steph, if I could follow up a little bit from my own personal experience, I can tell you the elections are unofficial on election night. I won my first race by 1,002 votes. I won the next two by substantially more. It's always nicer to declare victory at 9 p.m. versus declaring victory at midnight and waiting to see what the final absentee results could be in certain areas. But as somebody who's been through close races, we know that you have to gather information about how many ballots still remain eligible to be sent back in. And that's going to be more of a problem this year with the increased usage of absentee or mail-in ballots. So that's a concern that I think all of us have. But in the end, our local election officials are the ones who ensure that the absentee ballots already turned in get processed in a manner that's consistent with the state and local laws set by officials. Now, in my district, in the primary during a pandemic, one of my largest counties, Champaign County, Illinois, a brand new county clerk, he decided to count ballots before the polls closed and post those results. Now, I don't know about you, but that could really help determine where you need to go cast some votes for your preferred candidate. That type of activity is what's wrong with politics, not what's right. We want the results as quickly as possible, but we want them to be fair. And we don't want one side or the other to have an advantage. And most county clerks, most election officials feel that way, but there are some that put politics over process and actually getting it done correctly.
If I could just follow up, it's a related question, but to that point of there being, political incentives to maybe announcing victory, claiming victory or announcing results before all the absentee votes have been counted, are there things that state and local officials are preparing to prevent that from happening? Is there a place for state and local officials to be more public in saying that, the results you're seeing from media organizations are not final? Is there preparations being made just to help in such a situation?
Well, I mean, you've heard it here today, Steph. I think it's your job in the media to get that message out. We can say it till we're blue in the face. Every election official can say it till we're blue in the face, that these results are not official. The AP says it. Every election prognosticator report should always say these are unofficial, and they do. But the Americans also expect our elections not to go on like in New York for 6 weeks, where we don't know what the results are. And then in the end, have 84,000 New Yorkers be disenfranchised because their mail-in ballots were deemed ineligible. That's a problem too. And I know every local official on this call today is working hard to make sure that they don't allow any disenfranchisement of any voter. But if there's a big push to use processes and use them late in the election season, that could increase the odds of a voter not having their vote counted, I think it's up to all of us to let people know their options. And an option, even during a pandemic, we can safely go vote. As mentioned earlier today, if we can go to our grocery stores where we see essential workers that have been on the job throughout this entire pandemic, we can go to our hardware stores, we can go to our convenience stores, we can go to our restaurants. I believe elections are essential too. And 59% of Americans want to vote in person. It is the most secure way to cast their vote. And that's what we need to encourage. Ashley, who's next?
Okay, Henry with Wisconsin Examiner. I think that's our last one.
Yeah, hi. I'm wondering how the inclusion of intelligent mail barcodes is expected to improve the tracking of ballots this fall compared to in April.
Christy, Don, you guys want to address that first? Or somebody from Wisconsin?
Well, I think Meagan will probably know best. I think intelligent barcode will dramatically increase the confidence of a lot of Wisconsins actually be reassured that their ballot was returned without calling 15 times to the local election office. They'll be able to do a little bit of that tracking online, and they'll feel sure that they got notification that the ballot was returned. Or where is my ballot? If it seems to, if there's some sort of delay in that process, that's a good first step that they can go online and say, you know, has there been a delay in that process? But I know Meagan has been implementing that statewide after the primary, so I'll let her talk about what she sees as that being helping the situation.
Thank you. So yes, we've been working with our local election officials. I want to put a big plug in for them because they were critical in this work of taking a look at our April election and helping us figure out how do we create these additional efficiencies, transparencies in the process. And so we do now have intelligent mail barcodes incorporated in the ballot labeling process. And this does a couple of things. Like Commissioner Palmer said, it allows voters to have more transparency in where their ballot is at in their process. So voters can go to the myvote.wi.gov website and they can track their ballot. They can see where it is in the process. They can also see some indicators about how long is too long for my ballot to be stuck in a certain place, and what should I do if things don't look like they're progressing as they should, and provide them with that information as well. But probably the most important part of this, and it happens behind the scenes, is it allows us and our local election officials to monitor trends where we might see ballots that have been issued but haven't started tracking, or an unusual amount of ballots that haven't been returned that came from a certain batch. And given that we have 47 days from that initial run of absentee ballots until the election, it gives us time to work with the local election officials if there is some type of issue. If there are ballots lost in the mail, like we saw in April, we're able to address that, to cancel those ballots and to reissue them to the voters in time for them to still receive their ballots. And so I think it has a lot of benefits from both the front end and transparency for the voters, and on the back end with us being able to monitor and identify trends.
I would encourage other states to develop, and I would encourage other states to utilize the same barcodes that Wisconsin and my home state of Illinois use. States like California do not. So that's why when you have the ability to harvest unlimited ballots, at a time using a process of ballot harvesting that was corrupted in North Carolina, to where we didn't even seat a member of Congress because of a Republican operative who committed a crime, that person's likely to go to jail. However, under California law, with zero tracking capabilities with barcodes and what have you, that person likely never would have been caught. That's a problem. That's what we need to address. And that's why we have roundtables like this. And that's why we participated in hearings with some of my colleagues on the House Administration Committee to call out where we think we need to see improvements. I want to thank everybody for being on the call today. I want to thank members of the media. I appreciate the opportunity for you to be here. And I'll leave you with this. I don't know if you saw the story yesterday. I don't know if you'd like to confirm what was in that story from the New York Post. It was a whistleblower who decided to talk about what he has done as a Democratic operative in the New York, New Jersey area, and how he corrupted, he or she, because I don't know if it's a he or she because it's a whistleblower, how he or she corrupted the process. That's something that's pretty telling that I think everybody in the media needs to take a look at and understand. When we're told by many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that no fraud exists, it's so minuscule. Well, you know what? Somebody who won a race by 1,002 votes, every minuscule amount counts. And those are the types of issues that we're trying to address with these roundtables. Go take a look at that story. Look at that whistleblower. We've heard a lot about whistleblowers lately. Obviously, we got to take them seriously. And I take this one seriously too. So with that, I'll close, say thanks everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to have you on. And this roundtable has ended.
Thank you.